An economy is only as strong as the participation of its people. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure also to see so many trainees in the house. My name is Mala Dukaran. I am a member of the Board of Directors at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, otherwise known as CAPRI. CAPRI is an independent think tank devoted to evidence-based research towards improved public policy making in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Today's event is a critical examination of Jamaica's labor force participation rate and the strategies we can employ to raise it. We are thrilled to be hosting this event in partnership with Heart Trust NSTA, which plays a vital role in workforce development, and we would like to extend our thanks to them as well as to ROK Hotel for providing us with this wonderful space today. This afternoon's discussion addresses a pivotal challenge for Jamaica's development, ensuring that more of our people are fully engaged in the workforce, which is key to unlocking both individual potential and national progress. This report, entitled Outside In, Increasing Participation in the Labor Force, is part of a broader initiative at CAPRI to explore structural challenges in the economy and to find data-driven solutions to address them. In a few moments, you will receive the presentation of the report. Then we will transition into a panel discussion moderated by our Executive Director, Dr. Damian King. Joining him on the panel will be Dr. Kellyanne Dixon Hamill, UE lecturer and lead researcher for this report, Dr. Tanisha Ingleton, Managing Director at Heart Trust NSTA, Senator the Honorable Dana Morris Dixon, Minister without portfolio in the Office of the Prime Minister, responsible for information, skills, and digital transformation. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Dixon Hamill to begin the presentation. Thank you.
In 2023, Jamaica experienced its lowest unemployment rate since independence. The unemployment rate fell below 5%. This means that we had a constrained labor market, which then also a tight labor market, which constrained growth. At the same time, 35% of those who were eligible to be part of our labor force were outside of the labor force. What do we mean by being outside the labor force? Well, first, you're part of the working age population, and that is defined by the International Labour Organization, ILO, as 14 plus. You're also not employed or categorized as unemployed. And then finally, you're not available to work or not interested to work. It's important to note that given these figures, we are using the previous definitions and not those that Statin started using in January 2024. The question is, who are these 35%? What are they doing? And can we bring them into the labor force? Before we get to that, let's look at the global context. Over the past 2 decades, labor force participation rates have been declining. However, in Jamaica, because Jamaica is different, labor force participation rates have been increasing over the last 12 years. has moved from 62% to 65%. However, we're still finding it difficult to mobilize certain parts of our population, and specifically women. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem that's unique to Jamaica, because globally, 72% of men participate in the labor force, while only 47% of women do. This is partly due to the gender roles, the traditional gender roles that have been assigned to women, specifically those that require care. And so what do we mean by care? Well, first, if you have children, picking them up from school, taking them to school, attending meetings with them, going with them to the doctor, staying home with them while they're ill, preparing their meals, ensuring that they have a clean environment. If it is that you have someone who's elderly, then again, you have to make sure that they're eating properly, that they're taking their medication, of course their doctor's visits, and then also you have to get the medication, and depending on which route you're using to get that medication, it can be time consuming. And then finally, you could either be ill or incapable of working, whether it's a disability, and of course, the same things apply. Around the world, various interventions have been used to bring persons into the labor force. If we look at high-income countries, what they have done is increase their retirement age, and of course, with the idea of holding persons in the labor force longer. But in addition to that, they've also added incentives for them. For women, more specifically, there's been sector-specific training, and what's meant by that is that in any job where there is a demand, women have been trained in that area, and that is irrespective of whether it is a job that is traditionally considered male or female. It's just where the need is. And then women have been given access to financial solutions, for example, direct deposit accounts, and there are also employment guarantee programs. The interventions I've just mentioned have been relatively successful. When it comes to youth, though, specifically those who are not employed, not in education, or not in training, they've tried training programs and job preparation programs. They haven't been as successful as hoped, partly because there's a high dropout rate, and also there are other issues that affect the general outcome. So in Jamaica, we have 411,000 persons outside the labor force. This means that for every one person outside the labor force, for every 3 persons in the labor force, there is one outside. But yes, I'm quoting 411,000. This is the 2022 figure. This would be different from the figure that you would have heard from Statin, the 750,000. That's a huge difference. But what causes this difference? Well, we've constrained our analysis to only those between 18 and 70. The ILO in 2022 would have had the age being 14 up. So we know those between 14 and 18 should be in school, and ideally we want to keep them in school. And then of course those above 70, and there is no end age. So at some point these people will retire. So who are these 411,000 persons? What are they doing? Well, we have half of them who have said, we don't need work. We're not interested in work. That's going to be a difficult set to bring into the labor force. Another quarter are in school. And ideally we want to leave them in school so that at the end of the day they have a higher skill. We have 7% who are ill or incapable. So again, we may have difficulties easily bringing them into the labor force. And of course, 6% who are retired, so they have decided they no longer want to be a part of the labor force. There's 6% who will join within the next 12 months. So the reality of the situation is we don't need to entice them into the labor force. They have already made their decision to come in. It's just a matter of time. And there's another group, 4%. 4% of persons who want to work but cannot do so because of care responsibilities. And I mentioned what those care responsibilities were before. So these 4% equates to 15,000 persons, 1% of the labor force. Now you may say 15,000 persons, that's not a lot. But if we were to increase our labor force by 1%, we could see a 2% increase in GDP. Now that is significant. So based on our research, what have we found? That there's limited potential in bringing persons into the labor force. They're retired, they're not able to work because of illness or because they're incapable, or they're in school. However, we do have these 15,000 persons, of which 96% of them are women. So what do we recommend? CAPRI has done extensive research on the care economy. And our recommendation comes from there. The state should subsidize the cost of care by issuing vouchers to working and job-seeking parents for use at registered and regulated daycare and nursing care facilities. So it means that this recommendation formalizes the care sector because it needs to be a registered and regulated nursing or daycare facility. But then it also frees up those who are doing care responsibilities to now join the labor market. Is this a novel idea? Not really. Something like this has already been done in the United Kingdom, where what they do is to parents who have children 3 and younger, that they give a subsidy for daycare. It has also been done in Mexico, where they're given vouchers. But closer to home in Barbados, there are state-run daycare facilities, and parents are therefore able to use those for their children. So, in conclusion, we know that it's only 15,000 persons. But we know if we bring in these 15,000 persons, using economic theory, we should see an increase in our GDP by 2%. So it is worth considering such an intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so now we're going to have a discussion. It is going to be organized as a panel discussion, but the discussion really is to include all of you who clearly have an interest in policy in general and in this policy issue. So we're going to use an online platform to engage you with questions and for you to put your questions on or to vote for the questions you want addressed. So we're going to tell you now how to use that.
Hi there, I'm so glad you could join us. We have an exciting program lined up. In true CAPRI style, we've done the research and packaged it just for you. If you're new here, stay tuned. There's much to be learned. Want to know how you can participate in the discussion? We'll be using Slido, which is the ultimate Q&A and polling platform for live and virtual meetings and events. It's super easy to use and very interactive. First, you will need to open a browser on your device. Type in slido.com. You will be asked to enter an event code. We're keeping it simple, so our event code is CAPRI. Once you've entered the code CAPRI, you are live. From here, you will be able to send in your questions, upvote the questions of others, and participate in live polls. We recommend stating your name and location, but this is not required. Now you're all set to engage with us throughout this event. Thanks for your participation, and we look forward to your questions.
Or just go to slido.com and you can put in your questions and upvote them. I'm going to now invite panelists to join us. We have the lead researcher, Dr. Kellyanne Dixon-Hamill, the managing director of Heart NSTA, Dr. Tanisha Ingleton, and I have to take a deep breath, Senator Dr. the Honorable Dana Morris Dixon, Minister without portfolio with oversight for skills, digital transformation, and information. Thank you all for joining us. So, there's a bit of background here, which I think is going to help us to frame this discussion. This report, in a sense, forms the third installment of a look at what is happening in the labor market in Jamaica. As the presenter pointed out, Jamaica now has a record low unemployment rate. It's the first time since independence, or since we have started measuring and recording unemployment, that we are close to what economists call full employment, which is you have as many people working as you're ever going to get. And the implications of this were brought out in a report that CAPRI published in March of last year called Growthless Jobs. And it shows how this labor market situation really undermines many of the assumptions that guided macroeconomic policy, and how we need a new way of thinking about macroeconomic policy, and in particular, how we stimulate economic growth. It's more now than just creating jobs. The jobs are there, and we're not getting the growth that we would like to have. And recognizing that situation, we published another report in January of this year called Brain Gain, in which we put that in the context of the tremendous amount of emigration that we have, and how we can look to replace some of that with different policies regarding work permits to see if some of it can be replaced with immigration. And while we're having this public engagement with the idea of a labor shortage, those 400,000 people outside the labor force look tempting. It looks like a free pool of labor. And so we thought it a good idea to really look into how much potential is there to bring some of those into the labor force. And that's the genesis of this report. I'd like to start off, Kelly, by just talking a bit about where you got the data from and what is the methodology you use to derive the results that you presented.
Okay. The data is the Labor Force Survey, which is a quarterly survey done by Statin, where they visit approximately 16,000 households and they interview the persons within the household to determine whether they're part of the labor force or not. The data set we used would have been that from 2022, so it's a couple years back. And the basic idea is that when an interviewer goes to a household, they ask certain questions to identify whether the respondent is employed or considered unemployed, and then finally outside the labor force. It's not just, okay, we talk to you and, oh, you're outside the labor force. It's no, asking a specific set of questions. First, they identify, are you employed? If you don't fall into the employed category, then they try and say, okay, do you fall into the unemployed category? And then if you don't fall into any of the other two, those two, then you become part of outside of the labor force. Within that, what was done was based on the questions. So questions like, are you in school? Are you ill? Are you incapable of working? Do you want to work soon? Those questions were used to categorize persons into the groups that we had here, specifically those who were retired, those who were incapable or ill, those who were in school, and then of course we had everyone else.
Thank you. So one of the characteristics of those people who are outside the labor force, and this is of course relevant to how we try and entice them, is the fact that most of those, the vast majority of those outside the labor force are relatively unskilled. And this of course is why we have the skills minister to be a part of this discussion. So with that as the context, Senator, really, what are the ways in which we can, are there ways to upskill people in the short run?
Thank you for that question, and I think I should also add to the history of the study. We've never in Jamaica had any minister that had responsibility for skills. So this was an innovation by our Prime Minister, and he felt that we needed to look at skills in a lot more detail and also to figure out solutions to the issues faced by many businesses in terms of their inability to hire individuals who did have qualifications. And so Heart Trust NSTA was tasked. I mean, I'm a student of CAPRI, and too often when we are in government, we make decisions based on anecdote and what we feel should be the policy and not really based on data. And so we encouraged Heart NSTA, and Dr. Ingleton is of a similar thinking that what we do has to be embedded in research. And that is why CAPRI was called, because we felt that it is important as we make policies that we're actually looking at the data. And so I'm very happy that we have this study today, because it helps us to think about how we get more people into the labor force, but it's not anecdotal. When I go around communities across Jamaica, I invariably see a lot of people on the corner, and they're invariably men who are on the corner. And when you engage them in conversation, which I do, I ask, why are you not working? Or I start with, what are you doing? And then when they say, nothing not going for me, I have a conversation as to why nothing is going on for them. And I will talk about Heart and what Heart has, or, just trying to understand the root of what the issue is. And there are many of those, and we walk around and we see them. So even though Jamaica has done fantastic in terms of our unemployment rate, we still see them in every community that we go into. We see these young men especially. And so it's important that we figure out how we can reach them. And one of the things they've said, I know they've said to me, and which we've had to look at in policy, is that they're not able to go to where the training is. They say they want to be trained, but then they say it's too expensive for them to access training. I went into one community and the men said, the Heart Center is over there, and we from this community can't walk over there. And so we can't access training. And so it's really important that we have a lot of data in relation to what is really happening in terms of those who are outside of the labor force. And I think this goes a far way in demonstrating that. The 200,000 who are not looking for work are the key ones that I'm concerned with, in understanding more about that group. that doesn't want to work. Because when we look at the 15,000 who want work and don't fall in any of the other categories that Kelly so wonderfully pointed out to us earlier, they're women, they're mainly women, and they want work, but they are stymied by the care environment, which I think every woman in here understands that and understands the dilemma around that. We hear the baby just now. She's agreed that it is very difficult for her mother to navigate being at a CAPRI event, while also, wanting to know about policy and wanting to be able to enhance her life and her career. But obviously, childcare is an issue, and I like that she brought the baby here. I think this is a great place for the baby to be. But we see that as obviously an outcome, and that's something that we have to look at as government in terms of policy. And CAPRI has already been saying that. But for us, I do think we do need to spend some more time, especially on the men, especially on those who do not want work. We have to understand them more. And so the care program that I know Dr. Ingleton will speak to, which was announced by the Prime Minister earlier this year, was an attempt to start to do that. We didn't have the CAPRI study results yet. And so, you try things. You try things based on conversations with our young people, and they said they don't have the money to go to training. They would love to, but they can't. And then they also said that they have to hustle. They have to do a little hustling all the time. And so I can't hustle and go to school at the same time. And that's why we said, all right, if you fall in this category, we'll pay you a stipend every week so you don't have to hustle. You can actually go to your classes. And this is going to be very interesting. And we're going to have a very robust monitoring and evaluation framework, because that's what's key. You have said it, Dr. King and Dr. Dixon Hamlin, right, that we have many people who are working. Our participation rate is higher than the rest of the world. And so we have to start with that. Are we, going down a losing path? I don't think so. I think it's worth getting at those who have opted out of the system to try to bring them in. Now we understand, though, that this is going to be extremely hard, because we're already speaking about numbers that are unprecedented globally. And so when you start with that position that we are almost at full employment, in any other country, this notion of trying to get even more people in the labor force, they would see it as futile. That's a futile effort. But we are not giving up on anyone. And we believe that we need to have opportunities for skills training, upskilling, and we have to find them where they are. And we're going to have to do more community work. But at the same time, as your study has said, for those who want to be in the labor force, especially women, we have to look at the care economy, and you've given us a study already. And so as government, we really have to engage with that. And that was a long answer. I'm sorry.
Well, no, but you've given us a great segue into Dr. Ingleton to really talk about how does HEART already address this issue, and what is coming to address this issue more sharply.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. King and Dr. Hamiel, for the presentation and the report. I actually read it thrice, and the reason why I did that is because of my keen interest in ensuring that the HEART NSTA Trust, whatever we do, is driven by data. So just to add a little history as well to the report, we would have been questioning this, we would have been interrogating this. The narrative was very strong in the public spaces. We would have pulled our teams together to ascertain, okay, we're hearing this, we're seeing the research. Our strategic planning team that's sitting right there would have already started to delve into this in terms of their own research. And so it was really very easy for the trust to ensure to fund this research so that there could be objectivity in terms of the findings. So it's very important for us to really understand the interest we have in ensuring that whatever interventions we put in place, that those are driven by data. So what is it that we're doing? Now, having looked at the report, we're seeing that this is not only a training challenge, it's a social challenge. And given that it's a social challenge, it really means that more than HEART, there would have to be other players that would need to come on board to stem this particular challenge of care, providing opportunities for individuals to be in a workspace whilst their children are being cared for. But what are some of the things that we do already to attract these individuals who are so challenged? Now, a part of the report spoke about individuals who have the qualifications, but who have the skills but do not have the proof that they have the skills, as in they have no certification. What is it that the trust does now? We have the prior learning assessment program that we offer at the institution, where individuals who are skilled, you do not need to be in a classroom setting. We come to you, we assess you on spot. We introduced our minister just recently to our mobile assessment unit, which is a fully equipped bus where we drive around every space in Jamaica to find those individuals. You cannot come into the trust for training. You have these skills that you're not certified for because you have not gone to any formal institution. Here we are. We are going to assess you right here on spot. We are going to give you the resources right here on spot. We're going to assess you. We're going to give you a small test to ascertain where you are, and where there are gaps, we will fill them. So we do that to reach those who cannot reach us. We spoke prior to access. We address the access issue by totally removing the fees. Individuals may argue that some of the fees were negligible. Once there is a dollar, it can become a barrier. So whether it was $10,000 or $15,000 or even lower, the fact that there is a monetary value attached right there, we recognize that there could be a barrier. So we totally remove the fees, administrative fees, tuition fees, to help individuals who would have that challenge, all the way up to level 4, which is the associate degree. Then we have the high school diploma equivalency program. So you're home with your children, you didn't even get the chance to finish your high school education. You dropped out at grade 9 or otherwise. You are now an orphan, your parents would have died, your family is scattered. How do we help? We take you into the trust and we build you from the ground up. Those are the things we do. We certify you through city and guilds to ensure that you are ready to enter the labor force. So the trust would have been doing quite a number of strategic interventions. And then we have the care program that our minister spoke to earlier. We are going to be engaging 1,890 individuals across 63 constituencies. This is a homogeneous group. There are those who can't read. There are those who can. There are those who would have accessed some sort of training in their lifetime before. There are those who would not have. But we are taking them in because our responsibility is to ensure that every young man and woman can insert themselves into the labor force so that they can lead more productive lives. What else do? We sell it to them not so much as an economic benefit, but as a personal and professional benefit, because they have to understand, what will this do for me? So yes, it will add to the GDP, as Okun's law would have indicated, but that means little to the young woman who is taking care of her child. So we sell it to them as, how is it that you as a person can advance? How can you take control of your life? How can you be independent? And with that, we launched the air conditioning maintenance course for only women, because we recognize that that particular area is an area in high demand, but it is male dominated. It's $30,000 to install an AC, and that is perhaps the 24,000 BTU. If you're looking at the 36 BTU, it's more than that. Am I correct? And why can't we do it? Why can't we install our own air condition? And why can't we service them? So we find that it's the men who are coming to install air condition and to service them, collecting all of this money, and we as women, we are there. We can do it too. So we advertise that course for women only. Our target, Dr. McLaughlin, was 50. We received 300 applications. Women wanting to get this skill because this is something that is in high demand. And what have we done? We had a 50 target. We said we can't turn them back. We're looking at 300. We took them all in. That is how important it is to us to ensure that we upskill our people and that we continue, minister, to find opportunities that they can improve their lives, live more productive lives, and then the cherry on the top is that growth in GDP, which is really what we're after. But we have to sell that to them in a very personal way so that they will find that motivation to be in this space. Thank you.
Let me take this as a bit of personal learning, because when we look at the low skill level of the labor force, some of us on the platform who will not be named and are male would have taken the view that the failing of the educational system to properly educate and skill a whole cohort is not something that you can sort of change in a meaningful way in the short run. And what I'm getting from both of you is that that is not quite right. That there are things you can do.
That is not quite right, Dr. King, and I should note, on the air conditioning course, I told Dr. Ingleton that I wanted to do a course at Hart. I'm the Minister of Skills, I need to do something at Hart. And I said I wanted to do something in the electrician type area. And then they come and they say, we can offer you air conditioning repair. And I didn't take it up because I'm still hoping they will find a course for me so I can be an electrician in my next life and have maybe the biggest electrician company in the Caribbean, right? But there are things we can do in the short run. A lot of courses are short-term courses. And if you look at what Hart is doing, you do not have to be literate to do some of the courses. We're actually meeting people where they are. And that is important because a lot of individuals will say, will stay away from a Hart, stay away from skills training because of that. And if we look at the work that Hart is doing in relation to certification while on the job, that is showing you that a lot of these individuals who may have been reluctant to go to a Hart, they're willing to go and learn a bit of tiling, maybe learn a bit of mason work on the job, and they're learning it. And they can get certified from doing that. And a lot of the courses are short-term courses. They're not long-term courses. And so the key thing for us is figuring out how we get the bodies into Hart. And so the elimination of the fees was one, and the Prime Minister did that, and the numbers shot up. But then that wasn't enough because you still saw, especially our young men, and I know we're speaking about women, and I'm a woman, I'm very interested in that, but I'm also very interested in our young men who we are losing. They're on the corner. We can give them a skill that can empower them to do work in a 6-month period. So there are short-term interventions that we definitely can do. It's just about how we get them in. And that's where the CARE program comes in. It's a beautiful program that you can get a lot of data from. Do we think we're going to solve this problem with CARE? Absolutely not. But we think with the CARE program, because it's 30 individuals from all across Jamaica, rural, urban areas, we're going to be able to see some of what works with these individuals. Some of these individuals will have issues with literacy. We know that. Some of them have issues with numeracy. And we are going to take them in, and we're going to do some of the additional work with them in terms of preparing them for the workforce and giving them even some of the empowerment we did with LIFT, which is giving them some of the social documents that they don't have. I mean, something as simple as your TRN or your birth certificate. Those are things that some of these young men do not have, and that stymies them being in the workforce and even putting themselves out there ready for skills training. And so we're eliminating those barriers, and what we'll see is what worked. And what may work in Kingston may not work in a rural community, or it may work in a rural community but not in Kingston. But at least we will have over 1,000 people across the country where we are trying a new approach, where we're layering on other interventions to try to see if we can actually reach those individuals who have opted out of the system. And it's a big number, Dr. King, because as Dr. Hamill said, there were around 200,000 people who have said, I'm not looking for no work. It's not because I'm ill. It's not because I have an issue. It's not because of care needs. It's just, I don't want to work. And we have to understand that 200,000 and see if there is an avenue for that 200,000. And later, Dr. King, on your question of growthless jobs, that's where the upskilling piece is going to be really, really important going forward.
Well, we're coming to those 200,000 now. Go to the, install the Slido app or go to slido.com. There's a poll on Slido that we are asking you to fill out so we can, get some information. And there are questions, and by the way, people who are looking at the live stream, who are tuning in from the live stream, can also post questions on Slido. So you don't need to be in the room. And Slido is really concerned about those 200,000 people. That big chunk of people who just don't want to work. Kelly, you're familiar with the data. Why is it we can't say anything more about those 200,000 people?
So, before I answer that question, though, I want to point out that when we're looking at those who are participating in the labor force, the data includes those who are in the formal and informal sectors. So, someone who is hustling, once you are doing what's considered work, you are part of that employed group. So we haven't forgotten about that sector because it's an important sector, especially in Jamaica. But more specifically about these 200,000 people.
Yeah, the 50%.
The 52% to be exact. So we can't say a lot about them because the way the questionnaire is structured, it does not ask, why do you think you do not need to work? So we're not able, at least the questionnaire that was being used in 2022. We know that in 2024 there have been some updates to the questionnaire. Honestly, not sure if that is part of the updates. I don't remember exactly. But we don't have that part of the information. What we do know is that, as Senator said, they're mainly men, and the majority of them are under the age of 26. Yes.
Okay, that's news. That's news.
Yes. And that's what we see when we drive around every day. I think every Jamaican sees it. It's males that are young males that have opted out of the formal working system. And we have to find them, and we have to bring them in.
That 52% is what we see.
Now, that makes it more intriguing because they must have some source of support. And there's no way to tease out from the data what their source of support is or might be.
So
I will just add the context to that.
Right.
That the labor force survey, it being a household survey, it includes people who work informally. It includes people who work illegally. So,
yes,
with that background,
work is work.
Work is work.
Work is work.
There's no moral judgment in the labor force survey.
So, we were able to find that it's interesting because I think, when you do research, you sometimes go in with preconceived ideas. So, it was interesting to find that the majority of persons who were outside the labor force were not being supported by remittances. Yes, I know, not. Mm-hmm. They were being supported by local funds coming from family or friends. And someone asked, but that doesn't make sense because we have all these remittances coming in. Which is true, and I agree, and there must be some explanation behind it. And one of the things that we need to remember is what is considered as being employed. So they're interviewing persons criteria 14 plus, and ILO has that you're working for at least 1 hour per week. So once there is some sort of exchange for your labor, for at least 1 hour per week, you're considered as being employed. Now, if we think about it, almost, well, apart from the 35% or those looking for work, that's really quite a big chunk of persons. And the remittances are coming to probably assist those persons. So yes, you're not making necessarily income that will help you to meet all your needs, but you are now getting the additional support.
You know, the underlying ethos of this discussion and the explicit role of CAPRI. CAPRI's vision is a Caribbean where policy is informed by evidence. And that is what all of CAPRI's work is about, providing the evidence to inform policy. And with that, it sounds to me like amongst ourselves that we need to try to engage Statin to interrogate more deeply that 50% so we can get the information, get more information on them, and that can be the basis of formulating policy to get them more engaged.
Yes, and as I mentioned before though, I'm not sure what the new version of the survey looks like. I don't remember. I know that they have included additional indicators, so you'd be able to identify, for example, the discouraged worker, etc., but I'm not sure if that specifically is part of it. So we definitely need to engage.
So we should look into that.
We should
Absolutely.
look into it.
Tanisha.
Right. Dr. King, I just wanted to turn your attention a little bit to the retired population that we would have seen in the report. We are finding that at heart, increasingly, we're having individuals over 60 applying for our training. As a matter of fact, we graduated an individual that was about 73 or 75-year-old just last year, November. So individuals having reached retirement age, they're trying to find ways to re-enter the labor force. They're trying to find new skills. They're at home, they're healthy, right? They're healthy, they're you know, they can do work. And they're saying, okay, how is it that I can upskill so that I can be considered as part of that labor market? So that is something perhaps that we need to look at a little bit more closer to see that. I think it's 17% or so. I'm not sure what the retired 6%. That retired population is, but we should not leave them behind. And so at heart, there are no barriers for age or gender. As a matter of fact, we are seeing a 50-50 right now across our programs in terms of males and females. And we have maintained that for quite a while, that we're not seeing a gender gap in terms of more females or more males. And we're also seeing the uptake with females in the construction sector minister, right, which is key, and the manufacturing industry as well. We're seeing more women going into those areas because women, we are bold. You know, it's all about being bold, and how is it that I can stand out in a sector that really is not one that would readily recognize me. So the retired population is one that we perhaps can zoom in on a little bit more. What is happening? People are retiring, but they're not necessarily dying. And so they're trying to find ways to sustain themselves, not depending on their children, to sustain and to survive until the day they leave this earth. And heart is taking them in and reskilling and upskilling so that they can lead independent lives.
Yes, no, there are many areas traditionally dominated by men where women are showing themselves to stand out, like the cabinet. There's a question on Slido. There's a question on Slido asking, what is the source of your estimate that a 1% increase in the labor force will produce 2% more GDP?
Okay, so it's essentially Ocon's law. He did research in this area and was able to determine that for each 1% increase in the labor force, you could potentially get as much as, well, or to put it this way, for each increase you could get 2 times what that value was. So that's economic theory.
Yeah. So essentially it's an average from empirical data across a range of countries.
Yes.
If we're going to use HEART and perhaps other institutions to try to bring people in from outside the labor force. What is the role? Can businesses play a role in determining what the content should really be?
I'll just start, but I know Dr. Ingleton has a lot to say on that. And I think that's the reason why we are revamping our apprenticeship system, because we recognize that the private sector plays a very important role in skills development and skills training in general. And that is something that's a priority of the trust, and I know Dr. Ingleton has been working on that, because when we think about skills training, we have to know what the private sector wants. We have to know where the private sector is going. So for example, in manufacturing, especially with the low unemployment rate we have, and many manufacturing companies not being able to find work, you're find workers, you find them automating more. They're using more robots. We heard National, when they were doing their new plant in Montego Bay, they said they're going to be automating a lot of it, and they're going to be using robots as a part of it. We see what's going on with Wysinco's plant, which is very, very sophisticated. And so as that happens, that means that we need to have different workers in the manufacturing space. And Dr. Ingleton and the team have done a good job, for example, in bringing mechatronics to the fore, which is teaching our young people how to deal with technology that's that sophisticated in manufacturing. And so that interplay between the private sector and HEART is important, and that's why they do their sector skills council, and they're taking it to another level coming up with apprenticeships and having the private sector play an even bigger role. And Dr. Ingleton, I'll let you talk about that.
Thank you so much, Minister. Dr. King, curriculum development and implementation in HEART is a consultative and advisory process. And what I mean by that is that no curriculum can be developed or implemented without industry sign-off. Industry has to signal their approval of that curriculum. So essentially, it is difficult to have a mismatch between what industry needs and what the trust is offering, because industry has to approve that document. We have to consult with them, communicate with them, get advice from them, and before we can start one class, virtual or otherwise, they have to sign off on that curriculum. And that is why we would have seen at least a 99.9% take up of HEART trainees in industry. When you leave the trust, you are guaranteed placement in the industry. And the business individuals will tell you, for the tourism sector, Dr. Dyer's HEART College of Hospitality Service, she manages that college. Before she's even done training them, they're gone. Because they're trained so well that the entire belt in Ocho Rios, Montego Bay, they are taken over by HEART trainees. In this hotel, ROK, the chef that is in that kitchen right now, the head chef, is HEART trained. And you'll enjoy the meal after this. You have meal. Knowing that this is really coming from a HEART. We have meal, Dr. King. We're getting something but okay, you can go and buy, all right? And you will recognize that that taste that you're getting from ROK, that is coming from a HEART training. And that is what, Minister, gives us the pride and the confidence and the desire to move ahead. Because when you step into a particular space, when you step into Wysinco, when you step into Pepsi, when you step into these big industries that are really making impact, they have HEART individuals on their line. So there is a critical relationship between the PSOJ, the HEART Trust, and any other business community. It's very, very important to us. And we are formalizing that even more with the Sector Skills Council. Yes.
So there's a question on Slido, which, well, let's say I have a personal interest in it. So Jamaica doesn't have a nationally mandated retirement age, but many companies have 65 as the norm for their retirement. And somebody on Slido is asking, since raising the retirement age has worked in other countries, what is the room here to raise the retirement age above the norm of 65, and how might that benefit me personally? No, that wasn't part of the slider question.
That's part of Dr. King's question.
Well,
Do you want me to talk about policy?
you're the policy person, so.
All right, now that's a very good question, and we've seen some controversial increases in retirement ages that have been in the public domain. And I think we've all seen many individuals who are beyond the retirement age. And government did increase the retirement age from 60 to 65 in most areas. There were some areas where that increase had not taken effect, and we've tried to have that change done. But there are many individuals who are over 65 who can do really good work. And it is important that we look at whether or not that can be done. And I think that's where CAPRI comes in. That's where this kind of data analysis done, what labor economists and statisticians like you, Dr. Hamill, do, is really to look at what we should do as a country. Obviously, changing the retirement age entails, to a large extent, speaking with the unions, and having consensus around the country about it. But it is a conversation we're going to have, and you would have heard that there are many retired persons who are now looking at HEART, enrolling in HEART. They have a lot more to give, and in a country where we're almost at full employment, it is something that we're going to have to think about. And I think we have to be guided, obviously, by the data. We have to be guided by what has happened internationally, and we have to be guided by the sentiment of Jamaicans, and especially working with our unions before we can make a decision. But it's one we have to contemplate.
The last thing I'd like us to talk about is CAPRI's recommendation. We now have a whole body of work that talks about the ill effects of the care burden that women in the country face all around the world, but especially here. And we have demonstrated the cost socially, politically, economically, and so we have made this recommendation before about having government play a role in trying to stimulate a private care economy instead of now the informal care economy for which the burden falls almost entirely on women. Not entirely, but almost entirely on women, and how that diminishes the capacity of the country to employ their skills, wasted skills. And this is not just people who have to stay out of the labor force, of course. In the context, looking at our other work, the 3 publications we've done on the care economy, we see how people who are in the labor force, how much it reduces their productivity, how much reduces their own investment in their upskilling because they have the burden of care. And we think that the voucher recommendation could go some way to stimulating a commercial care industry. Minister.
All right, you're putting me on the spot with that one.
Absolutely.
And that's fine. You know that I'm very much a believer in data. And the care economy issue is not one that's just confined to Jamaica. We see it as a concern around the world for women. And I know, as someone who is working and trying to mother at the same time, if you were in my office this afternoon while I was doing a lot of stuff, my children were in my office. One crawled under my desk at one point. So I understand that issue, and especially for a lot of women, even in terms of making decisions about career, moving up, changing jobs, trying something that's a bit more demanding, you sometimes take pause because of the care economy. So I understand that deeply, and especially when you do not have resources or family support, it's even harder. So even with my concerns, it's worse for most women, many women in our country, and it is something that we have to look at. And I think the administration is broadly looking at how we can get more into the labor force, and we are open to a lot of suggestions in relation to how to do it. This study was one of them, and this was instigated by HEART, and I congratulate HEART for instigating this study and saying to CAPRI, we want you to do this on our behalf, and paying for this research to be done. And I think that was really good on our side. And of course, if we're going to spend money on research, we're going to use it. That's how we view it. The question of whether or not it's voucher is really what we have to examine, whether or not that can be looked at. There is a review of PATH that is ongoing. Individuals on PATH are a key priority for us as government and for them to be working. And so any recommendation is one that we will take on board. But I know there are other options in relation to the care economy other than vouchers. And those are things that with CAPRI and with others, and even using the private sector too, and getting private sector partnerships around having daycares on site and other types of initiatives, it's something we're going to have to look at, because it's clear that our women are very important to our labor force, and we have to do whatever we can to empower them to really be fully present in the labor force.
Dr. Dixon Hamill, Dr. Ingleton, Dr. Morris Dixon, thank you all for participating in this discussion. We continue to try to create the knowledge and provide the evidence to underpin sound policy in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. It is important not only because evidence-informed policy is more likely to be effective and successful, but unfortunately we find ourselves being countries with small populations and small public bureaucracies that often, with the best of intentions, don't have the capacity to do the research to inform their own policy decisions. And CAPRI exists to fill that gap. We're able to fill that gap because of the corporate social responsibility of our sponsors, of which, for the first time at this event, we welcome the ROK Hotel.
I don't know.
We're grateful to ART NSTA for supporting this work and possibly the future work that we have to do in this area. The 52%. So, to close our evening's presentation, we're going to invite our board member, Mala Dukaran, to take us out. In the meantime, our poll results are in. Poll was taken by those of you here and those who are streaming online. 87% of us are employed full-time. 5% are unemployed and seeking work, so they are part of the labor force. And 5% are retired, 3% self-employed.
Anyone not looking for?
They didn't say.
I've learned a lot. And, are you hearing me? And increasing labor force participation is not just about economic numbers, it's about unlocking the potential of our people and ensuring that we maximize the labor force's ability to contribute to this nation's growth. On behalf of CAPRI, I would like to extend heartfelt thanks to our presenter, Dr. Kellyanne Dixon Hamill, and to our moderator and panelists for their insightful contributions to this critical discussion. A special thank you to our sponsor, Heart Trust NSTA, to our Gold Circle sponsors, the good corporate citizens who support CAPRI's work throughout the year. We also want to thank the ROK Hotel again for generously hosting us in this space this evening. The full report, entitled Outside In, Increasing Participation in the Labor Force, will be available on our website, www.capricaribbean.org. Lastly, keep an eye out for the date of our next report launch, called Budget Scorecard, where we will evaluate the budget process in terms of transparency, oversight, and public participation. Thank you once again, everyone, for being with us, and we look forward to continuing this important conversation. Good evening.